to take a minute to bring up all of the team members, and this is honestly even a not fully comprehensive list. We have so many people that help take care of our hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients at Bonheur. All of the cardiomyopathy specialists that you'll hear from this evening, obviously, aside from Dr. Tobin, we also have a wonderful physician assistant that works with us and our amazing nurse who coordinates all of our care. Our electrophysiology team has two lovely physicians, Dr. Guerrier and Dr. Gutierrez Torres, as well as our nurse practitioner, Miss Jenny Strelson. And we have our staff in the cardiac MRI realm, Drs. Morlocco and Dr. Johnson. And then we have a genetics team, a dedicated genetic counselor for our team, and a geneticist that works with us for our cardiogenetic patients. And then Dr. Logan, our psychologist, who works with us in the division of cardiology, helping to provide support for our families. So we wanted to give credit to all of the different members of our team, even if they aren't here this evening. And then we should be able to get started, and I'll turn it, let's see if it's going to advance. Oh, goodness. There we go. So this is our team for this evening, obviously, minus Dr. Tobin, and then I'll let each of our providers introduce themselves as they go into their talk. So Dr. Miller is going to be first, and I will let her have the floor.
Thanks, Caitlin and Stacy. Like she said, happy to be here. My name is Elise Miller. So I'm one of the physicians on the team, as Caitlin mentioned to you guys. So I'm going to talk slightly quickly about screening for HCM, just with some highlights in particular from the 2024 ACC/AHA guidelines just from last year for screening, and a little bit of counseling as well. So I know this is kind of a somewhat frequent question, and I feel like as a provider, I'm asked, when asked about screening, this is kind of how my mind starts to go, honestly. So just trying to think of all the different flavors that we may see in clinics, and we're meeting these patients really all different phases of their life and their diagnosis, or not really, and they're just coming for screening and may not be diagnosed. And obviously there's different ways to do that, but with EKG and echo and genetic testing being some of the most common ways for screening and diagnosis. So that's mostly what I'm focusing on today. And at Bonheur Children's, as well as other pediatric cardiomyopathy places, we also see adults. So not just kind of our kiddos' parents, but also kind of as they age too, we continue to see them as they grow older. So this is kind of relevant to both the pediatric side as well as the adult side. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I think a lot of you on this call will kind of agree that you and we have a pretty good handle on how to do these things as listed here. So in terms of diagnosis by phenotype of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, I feel like everybody has is pretty familiar with guidelines as to measurements and whatnot to diagnose it. And then Mohammed and Caitlin, I know we'll talk, and then later Boo as well, about kind of the quote unquote management, because a lot of the times there's no fix depending on the underlying pathophysiology, but obviously that's moving forward, which Caitlin in particular will talk to you guys about today, but then also kind of how to prevent bad things from happening and manage symptoms, and then kind of the long-term kind of endpoints for these patients. And as you know, many of these patients with HCM do have a genetic component, which some of them are testable for, but not all of them, just as they collect data with all the genetic testing as years go by. And then in pediatrics, Dr. Tobin, as a big chunk of his career, has spent a lot of efforts and publications regarding the metabolic background of HCM in pediatrics specifically. So it's just something that, he always reminds us as well that we shouldn't overlook it. And even though it's rare, definitely don't want to miss that. So that's a little bit more unique in the pediatric population. And in terms of the prevalence, I know everybody always likes to talk a little bit about numbers, and that's certainly what they test us on for cardiology tests and whatnot, but also for counseling of the patients, and just, for kind of their mind sake and well-being, and just knowing that this is very common and plays into counseling and testing and considering screening. So the ACC/AHA guideline, these numbers are straight from there from last year. So it's estimated that 1 out of 500, they specifically say young adults in the United States only, have unexplained asymptomatic hypertrophy. So not necessarily meeting the clear diagnosis, but have hypertrophy. And then less than 1 out of 3,000 adults within the US, again, have symptomatic hypertrophy. And of those who are diagnosed with true HCM, 30 to 60%, so a big chunk of these patients are able to have an identified genetic variant with testing that we have available. And as you know, some of the importance of screening and counseling is that a lot of times those patients with these variants are passed down generation to generation, so in an autosomal dominant fashion. And what makes it hard, not just with HCM, but lots of genetic diagnosis, is the variable expression. Might be some terms that you hear and just kind of that big gray zone, if you will, in different ways that this can present or not. So just because somebody has a mutation doesn't mean that they'll ever develop the phenotype, but we just don't know. And so of the genetic tests, or variants, excuse me, that we know that can be pathogenic and associated with HCM, there are at least 8 known that affect the sarcomere, or kind of the muscle fibers themselves. And so the most common ones are the MYH7 and MYBPC3. So the myosin heavy chain and myosin binding protein variants. And then below that are the other 6 as listed here. So things like the Titin genes. And each of these are estimated to make up about 1 to 5%. And again, going back to that variable expression idea, even with these genetic findings and knowing that they're pathogenic, we still don't have a good grasp of the underlying mechanism at the microscopic level to be able to predict the clinical progression for any of these patients. So that makes it hard. Again, I know I use the term gray zone, but to me, that's really what it is, and makes it hard for counseling. And we wish, all the time that we could do better with that for our families and our patients. And not only on the pediatric side, but the adult side too, you think about family planning. So whether you're meeting a baby for the first time with a new diagnosis, and then mom's already pregnant with the next kid, and they're panicked that the new baby might have it too. So we're kind of counseling for not only the child that we're seeing, but also the mom, any other subsequent children they may or may not want to have, and then the one that's not born yet. And so testing options, I know I mentioned a few of them, and for screening as well, echo, EKG, and genetic tests I feel are the most common used for those things. But it is shared decision making. So more so in the adult world, I feel like, because they're adults, so they can consent or not consent to be tested. Some people have no interest to know if they carry a mutation that may or may not lead to heart disease or not. And some do. So, and what does that look like? So it kind of just depends whether it's, various options between those tests and what all they would like to do. So I feel like generally for our patients that we're screening, or for surveillance with family history, we would obviously do a lot of history taking and then kind of decide next steps. But EKG and echo, obviously screening for phenotype and evidence of the disease itself, and then genetic testing as well, which actually often is covered for first degree relatives too. And then it's important for all genetic testing, really, as data is collected through the years, just to not forget that more and more new genes are found. Some may be newly pathogenic that we didn't know this patient, they carried it but didn't know it was pathogenic, or vice versa. So it's important to keep that in mind every few years to kind of, run it through the system again. And so the takeaway point that you guys all probably know, but is again in the guidelines from this past year, is to screen all first degree relatives of anyone with a diagnosis of HCM. Does not matter what age. And some of those kids that we don't know, we do all the tests and we don't find anything, but we have very high suspicion based on family history or something like that, we would still follow them for surveillance every few years, depending on their age. All right, and I think I'm gonna pass it off to Dr. Opsey. Yeah, thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, Elise. Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Absi. I'm one of the pediatric cardiologists at Bonheur, and I'm the medical director of the Pediatric Ventricular Assisted Device Program. I'm happy to talk to you a little bit tonight about the therapeutic options in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. My focus tonight will be on the sarcomeric hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We won't be talking much about the non-sarcomeric, or what we call hypertrophic cardiomyopathy mimics, such as Noonan, Fabry's, and Danon, etc. diseases. Those would be a different discussion. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you skipped the slide, the first slide, Caitlin, the overview. Yeah. So the treatment and the goal strategies. Our goal is to relieve the symptoms such as dyspnea, chest pain, and syncope for patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and also reduce the left ventricular outflow tract obstruction, which produces all these symptoms. In addition, we try to prevent arrhythmia and sudden cardiac death. The key strategies to achieve these goals are: one, medications such as beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, and nowadays we have the myosin inhibitors, which we will talk in a little bit more details about in a little bit. Also, septal reduction therapy is considered sometimes for refractory cases. However, this is very rarely indicated in pediatric patients. And of course, ICD placement for high-risk patients. Next slide, please. Yeah. So first of all, our approach to manage patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy most of the times is based on adult data. Unfortunately, in pediatrics, as everybody knows, we don't have a lot of studies that are validated to guide us in the treatment and management of these type of patient populations. So a lot of it is more or less extrapolated from the adult data. And I'm basing most of my slides on the 2024 American Heart Association and American College of Cardiology guidelines, which, by the way, for the first time has some pediatric specific guidelines in it. So that was really good. So when it comes to management of symptomatic patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, patients who don't have symptoms and who don't have signs of obstructions, most of the times don't need medications. And we just keep monitoring and watching these patients as we go by. However, for patients who are symptomatic and obstructive, meaning like having resting gradient more than 30 or Valsalva gradient more than 50, the first line of therapy is typically beta blockers. If the symptoms persist or side effects occur, then calcium channel blockers may be used. And according to the most updated guidelines, the 2024 guidelines, myosin inhibitors can be considered for refractory cases for adult patients, 18 years or older, as well as the septal reduction therapy in case these patients are having refractory symptoms and not responding to medical therapy. For the patients who are obstructive, there are key things that people should remember. One, avoiding any vasodilator drugs or any positive inotropes such as digoxin or high-dose diuretics, as all these drugs can worsen the gradient and the degree of the obstruction, and with it, the symptoms will worsen. Also, we typically use a lot of verapamil, which is a calcium channel blocker. However, in certain patient population who have a very high resting gradient, or if they have a soft blood pressure, verapamil can sometimes be harmful. So something just to be watching for. For non-obstructive patients who don't have significant gradient, typically, if they are symptomatic, which sometimes can happen due to diastolic dysfunction, most of the times, and the impaired filling that they have, the treatment starts typically with beta blockers, with or without calcium channel blockers as a second-line option. And if they have any signs of volume overload, then a low-dose diuretics can be considered. And in case of persistent heart failure symptoms, guideline-directed medical therapy or even heart transplantation sometimes can be considered for these type of patients. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide. However, it's a good slide that shows the roadmap how we approach these patients with the sarcomeric hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. As we all know, it begins with a genetic mutation, which leads to pathophysiological changes that lead to secondary remodeling. And these secondary remodeling will lead to all the manifestation of the disease that we see sometimes, such as AFib, diastolic dysfunction, left ventricular outflow obstruction, ischemia, ventricular arrhythmia, and sudden death, and sometimes heart failure. So for the management-wise, genetically targeted therapies remain in the investigational phase. So we will not be discussing those here, but these are very promising therapies down the road. And the other important therapy that I would like to touch base on is myosin inhibitors, which is an emerging therapy that modify the disease progression. The other therapies that we have been using for treatment, such as for treatment of AFib, is more or less the same as for non-HCM AFib, using anticoagulation, rate medications, rate control medications, rhythm control medications, or sometimes ablation. And for patients who have diastolic dysfunction or left ventricular outflow obstruction or signs of ischemia, we mentioned the beta blockers, the calcium channel blockers, and there are some alternative therapies such as the myosin inhibitors, the disopyramide, and the septal reduction therapies all can be considered. In regard to the ventricular arrhythmia and sudden death, the ICD can be considered. And as we mentioned earlier, for patients who develop heart failure symptoms, which is a very small number of patients, less than 5% of those patients in total, the GDMT or guideline-directed medical therapy or even transplant can be considered. The only thing I would like to mention here is that for myosin modulator or myosin inhibitors, they're the only class of drugs that can modify the disease pathophysiology. So that's what is making it very exciting that we are able now to use these drugs in managing these type of patients. Next, please. So when it comes to the first-line therapy, as we said, the beta blocker, the non-vasodilating ones, such as propranolol, metoprolol, atenolol, we all familiar with. They do slow down the heart rate, they improve the filling time, and with that, they decrease the left ventricular outflow gradient. They are indicated as a first-line therapy for symptomatic obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and non-obstructive symptomatic non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The main side effect, as everybody knows, is fatigue. And if patients can't tolerate them, then we can consider calcium channel blockers such as verapamil or diltiazem. And again, we mentioned the side effects that patients who have severe resting gradient or low blood pressure, they can get worse with the calcium channel blocker. So that's just something to keep in mind when using these drugs. And when it comes to the alternative medications, if there's two line of therapies don't work, mavacamten, which is a myosin inhibitor, is an FDA-approved medicine back in 2023, April of 2023, got approved, and avicamten, which is still in the investigational phase. These drugs reduce the excess myosin-actin cross bridges and directly decrease the hypercontractility, and with that, they lower the left ventricular outflow obstruction. They are indicated for symptomatic adult patients 18 or older who have obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy who remain refractory despite the use of a beta blocker or calcium channel blocker. However, these medications are considered pure negative inotropes. So the main side or risk factor for the use of these medications is the reduction in the ejection fraction. That's why we have very vigorous echo protocol for all patients who are on these type of medications with serial echoes at the beginning every 4 weeks, and then we space them out to every 3 months. And on average, the data from the adult world have demonstrated that there is a reduction of 5% to 6% in the ejection fraction. So it's a modest decrease in the ejection fraction, not most of the times not warranting stopping the medications, but sometimes adjusting the dosages is important. The other important also side effects is that they do have a lot of drug drug interactions with the cytochrome for P450 inducer and inhibitors. So that's something also when we prescribe these medications, we have to be on the look for. So the medication, in general, the myosin inhibitors work, as we all know, in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it's believed that there is an excess or overabundance of active myosin cross bridges, and that's lead to the whole disease pathophysiology. The myosin inhibitors selectively inhibit the myosin and create less of these active myosin cross bridges. And with that, we see the decrease in the left ventricular outflow tract obstruction and the decrease on contractility and improvement of the symptoms. Some other alternative therapies that can be considered, disopyramide is more or less an adult medications that we rarely use in pediatrics. It's an actually arrhythmic drug that sometimes can be beneficial in patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and with AFib. It's a negative inotrope. It does help sometimes to reduce the left ventricular outflow obstruction. It's always used in conjunction with the beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. Also, sometimes, as I mentioned, for non-obstructive patients, low-dose diuretics can be considered, especially for volume overload states. Again, be very cautious with these medications as they can sometimes worsen the obstruction. What about the septal reduction therapy? When it comes to pediatric patients, it's rarely used. I can maybe count on one hand the patients I've taken care of who had to go for any form of septal reduction therapy. However, in the adult ward, for patients who are refractory, with refractory symptom despite the maximum medical therapy, with high gradient, meaning gradient more than 50, the option is there with either surgical myectomy or alcohol septal ablation. The key thing about the septal reduction therapy is that they have to be done at an experienced hypertrophic cardiomyopathy center. The volume here matters. So the higher the volume center, the less complications and the better survival you get. Next. And when it comes to the AICD implantation in pediatrics, again, based on the 2024 guidelines, the class 1 indication in cases with aborted sudden cardiac death or ventricular fibrillation or sustained VTAC. And then if none of these exist and the patients have one or more of these risk factors, such as family history of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, sudden cardiac death, or non-sustained VTAC, or massive LVH defined as Z-score above 10 or between 10 to 20, or unexplained syncope, or reduced EF, meaning EF less than 50, then these patients can be considered for AICD. There is a pediatric risk calculator that do help to estimate the sudden cardiac death risk, and through a guide family discussion through a shared decision making, that's the best approach to decide on who needs an AICD or not. The decision also in pediatrics is a little bit different with the higher threshold, giving that we have higher complication risk due to the body size of the pediatric patients comparing to the adult sizes. So in summary, it's a stepwise approach. Usually we start with the beta blockers, we add calcium channel blockers, and for patients who are 18 years of age or older, myosin inhibitors can be considered as a second line therapy. Myosin inhibitors are promising new option, and in pediatrics, there's an ongoing studies that studying the safety of using these drugs, and hope that we will have we'll be able to use these drugs very soon. And if the symptoms persist, alternative therapy such as disopyramide can be considered, as well as septal reduction therapy. Multidisciplinary evaluation at Experience Center is a key. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it to Dr. Ryan.
And I'm actually going to stop sharing because I see that Lisa has joined us from her trip home. So I'm going to give her the floor for the few minutes. We'll get a little break from our team. And then when she's all set, I'll talk to you all about clinical trials a little bit.
Well, I like that topic. Hello, everybody. Yes, I spent a couple of days in Stockholm. Isn't that a normal thing to say? So I'm sorry, this is my first day kind of back in the States, and I was a little jet lagged. So Stacy, thanks for opening the meeting, and thank you all for joining. And I got to hear a lot of the last talk, so thank you so much for that. Some really interesting stuff happening in HCM, finally reaching the kiddos. Myosin inhibitors have come, and hopefully we're going to learn more about those in the next couple of months or year or so. So I thought I would just take a couple seconds to kind of go over your polls here, because I saw that we have, you know what, I'll give you all a little bit more time to fill that out. I'll leave it open, but most of you are coming to us from the Northeast, some in the West, a couple in the Midwest. We have a mix, pretty much a good straight mix of industry and patients, and so we have patients, family members, industry, and medical providers all like split. There's a handful of all of you. So we're going to be hitting this from a lot of different angles today. Remember, the Q&A box is open throughout the entire event. You can post a question at any time. It may not get answered until we get to a break moment or at the conclusion of the webinar. Of those who are here who are on therapy, some are on medication, some have ICDs, some have experienced atrial fibrillation, and some have had genetic testing. So we've had some things happening. Somebody's had a myectomy or septal reduction therapy, and a bunch of you got nothing in the way of therapy. So are you considering any medication at this time? It looks like most of you guys are just shopping to learn, so that's great. A couple of you are getting care at an HCMA recognized center of excellence, or this one specifically, and some of you are not, so nice mix there. And okay, that kind of explains who we have here tonight. All right, so I am going to bring up my screen. At least I think I am. I thought I was. Hold on one second. Let's close this and find the screen that I want to share again. I'm not used to doing this from home. Oh, that's why. So Stacey, I tried to share on Facebook and it will not let me. Facebook is being very persnickety, and that's not nice.
It's only
So
letting me stream to my personal page, and yeah, so
yeah, I don't know why we can't. So we're being recorded, so this will be posted to YouTube when we get done with this. So
it did pop a message though, like, but I guess it didn't take, saying that we were live streaming, so I thought it did go.
Not to my knowledge. Okay, now I'm having a hard time. Stacey, can you open the PowerPoint?
You want me to share my screen?
Yeah, can you share your screen? I'm sorry, the computer world is glitchy tonight, guys. Sorry about that. It happens.
We'll make it work. I'll do this.
It always works eventually. Okay.
Are you seeing my screen?
I am. You can go ahead 2 slides or 3 slides. So there's our opening slide, you know, the cast of characters for this
Two talks in on this agenda and updates from the HCMA. I'm going to go off camera and let you do your thing.
Okay, thanks. But you got to advance the slides, please. Thanks. So for anybody who is interested, the HCMA annual report for 2024 is out and available on our website. One of the most important things to me in running a nonprofit organization is transparency. And I want everybody to know what's happening at all times. So the best way to get up to date on where we're growing, where our programs are growing, where we're getting our funding from, it's all right there in the annual report. So I encourage you all to take a look at it and maybe evaluate some of the programs that we're running and see if maybe you want to volunteer for something. This is the best way to shop for a good program. Next slide, please. So, wow, we just came off, I feel like it's January still, okay? So in January, I had the flu, so I kind of lost a good chunk of January, And then somehow I ended up in Mexico. We'll go into that in a minute. And then it was Heart Month. And that seems like a day that starts on February 1st and the day ends on February 28th, and we are running the whole time. So thank you so much to those of you who shared our post, comments on our post, did the frames on your social media profiles. We had some really great numbers this year. Over 150 of you asked us to put the frames on. Some of you might have figured it out on your own or used previous year frames. And it was so nice to see our threads like just kind of popping up with all those images. Our numbers were really amazingly great, like growth numbers in our comments at like up 83,000% because people were starting to really engage with some of this content. LinkedIn for the professional group, we got a lot of feedback there too, so our numbers are looking much better there. And Facebook, we were just blowing it up all month for, in comparison to what we do on a regular basis. The reach was great, and some of the posts that really got the most traction were infographics, things that you could share with your friends and family that didn't get too personal and gave them some facts and some guidance. It seems like that was the sweet spot. So we're going to create some more content in that space, and hopefully you can share that too. Remember, HM Awareness Day is always the last Wednesday of February. Next slide, please. And in fact, we now have laws, resolutions, awareness proclamations in multiple states. And some of these you have to do every year. Some of them are in perpetuity. So we will be presenting a list to you guys in an upcoming newsletter that says which states we're going to have to stack up for next year. And you can start the process in typically November, December, just learning how to do it, and then submitting at the proper time for your state if they have to be done every year. As you can see, we grew and grew and grew, and now we had to change the font size because there's too many to label. So thank you to all who did the hard work of completing the applications, or maybe even writing a letter, or in some cases even providing testimony to the State House. Thank you so much to all of you, and to all the states that participated. Thank you very much. To the ones that didn't, why not? Let's do it next year. Next slide, please. So finding the undiagnosed, we are on the precipice of a really exciting announcement. And I love that this night is about the kids and it's a pediatric event. So as I understand it, and Julie will pop in and correct me if I'm wrong, on Monday, it should actually be law, either signed by the governor of Virginia or it just becomes law. So the Children's Cardiac Safety Act is going to be law in Virginia. So we have New Jersey and Virginia, 2 down, 48 to go. But once the ball gets rolling and people see how smart this legislation is, I think we're going to go a great distance to improving the child examinations so that we can identify those with family heart health histories and those who are requiring specific tests. This is not just looking for HCM. We're looking for all the genetic heart muscle disorders. We're looking for the channelopathies. We're looking for the restopathies. We're looking for the congenitals. We're looking for any kiddo with a history of heart disease or any signs or symptoms. And this is the catch area where we can get all of them equally, because we know it's not just athletes who have problems with their hearts. So it's time to look at all kiddos. We want to improve the pre-participation screening physical, make it more standardized in each state. And we want to provide some education to the people doing physicals, as well as to families about what the signs and symptoms of diseases that can cause sudden cardiac arrest can look like. So thank you to the people of Virginia. When that law becomes official, you're going to get a lot of emails from us. Sorry in advance, but we're going to be celebrating. Next slide. Okay, so here we are. Virginia's up to date. I already gave you that progress. Massachusetts has model legislation pending. So if you live in Massachusetts and want to get behind that bill, you have a bill number there. Rhode Island, they're completing all their draft information. So we'll be getting you some more information from Rhode Island very soon. We're also working in communication right now with some stakeholders in Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Texas. And each state is kind of at their own role and they have their own cycle. So that's what we're sticking with right now. If you live in a different state and you're interested in bringing the Children's Cardiac Safety Act to your state, Call Julie Russo, tell her what state you're looking at and what we can do to get this done. Illinois should also be on here, but so that one's missing, but definitely Illinois. Next slide, please. So the All Hearts Collaborative is moving forward. This is just kind of an update for those who may have heard about it before. Derek Armstead is my inspiration here. He's a young man who passed away after having had a cardiac arrest just within a week of his passing, going to the emergency room and being turned away, but never asked, do you have a family heart health history? If they'd asked the question, they would have found out that his mother didn't make it to 30 years old and died of some type of heart problem. Maybe then Derek would have gotten the test that he needed to identify his HCM and protect him with a defibrillator, but we didn't get there. So we are trying to make sure that all hearts are seen, no matter what your outside looks like or how many years you've been on this planet. We all have a risk of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And for those of us who've been diagnosed young in our life, it's really frustrating when somebody's looking at you saying, but you don't look sick. We don't wear our hearts literally on our forehead. Nobody's going to see this. So we need to be seen, and young Black men need to be seen. Older white women need to be seen, and everybody needs to be seen. So the All Hearts Collaborative is working with faith-based community in the South Ward of Newark, New Jersey as a pilot project to get the word out about why it's important to know one's family heart health history. There'll be an app, and that app will be in multiple languages, and it will be able to be customized to any particular region. So lots going on in the All Hearts Collaborative. If health equity is important to you, please know it's important to the HCMA. We need to reach the undiagnosed in all different communities. And this is a really exciting initiative to not only look for HCM, but also amyloidosis and uncontrolled hypertension. And probably in the next iteration, we'll be adding some lipid panels as well. Okay, next slide, please. The Lori Fund's still available to you if you need to get to a center of excellence out of state and you need travel money. We are here to assist you. If you need to apply, just scan here or go to the website and look up the Lori Fund. There's an application. You must financially qualify, but we're pretty open on the income levels. So if you think you need it, try, and we'll take a look at the application. If you don't need the money, but you awfully like to support somebody who needs the money and needs that travel voucher, you can donate at any time. And all of the proceeds that come into the Lori Fund stay in the fund. And when we pay out a grant in the fund, we give ourselves a couple % for processing, and that's it. So you want clean money to help patients get to care. They get $599.99 max. And maybe it's a plane ticket, maybe it's a hotel room, maybe it's food on the road, but it's something to help make it easier to get to an HCMA recognized center of excellence or a transplant program. So please apply. Next slide, please. Don't miss Tales from the Heart. Tomorrow I'm with Harry Lever, and I'm recording a couple of other editions. We've been doing a lot more patient stories. We've been doing some really exciting long podcasting on HCM Awareness Day. So I encourage you to look up Tales from the Heart wherever you get your podcasts and take a listen. You know, we get into some interesting conversations. It is not scripted. It is all conversational with thought leaders in the space. We might have a topic for the month, but we kind of jump all over the place. And, you know, you want to know what somebody really thinks about something? Have a casual conversation, not a PowerPoint. All right, so join us on Tales from the Heart. Next slide, please. Our online discussion groups are moving and grooving, and if you haven't signed up for one yet, I would encourage you to do so. It is peer-to-peer support, and we thank our volunteer peer members who are running these discussion groups. Some of these people have been doing the program since 2020, so they rode out the pandemic with you all, and these communities grew and friendships blossom and education is transferred. So if you haven't joined the groups, please do. I'm going to tell you a little secret. When they first launched, we called them support groups and nobody wanted to come and play. When we changed it from support to discussion, the numbers blew up. So come to discuss, but guess what? You're also going to feel supported when you're there. Next slide, please. If you want to become an HCMA ambassador, please scan the little code here. All we ask is that you get some education from us on where to find resources on HCM, share your HCM journey with specific hashtags, and really just start to have some fun with the HCM community. We share projects and we do collaborative work, like the great piece that we launched on HCM Awareness Day, which is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. They all say it in the syllables. Hard to say, easy to learn about, and then the link and the call out to the website. So they had fun putting that together all themselves, and they've got other projects they're working on. So if you want to have some fun, raise some awareness, and make a couple friends, join the ambassadors. Next slide, please. Okay, Bighearted Warrior Tour, April 26th, in person in Orlando. We already have a whole bunch of people signed up. Please come out and join us. Register now. July 26th will be, what's with the 26th this year? We'll be in Seattle, Washington. Super excited to get out to the Pacific Northwest. And we will be meeting with both the teams at Virginia Mason and UW, and probably trying to get some of those pediatric cardiologists out there as well. So come join us. It's going to be a great event right at Bell Harbor. Then we'll come over to the East Coast and we'll be in Baltimore. We haven't been in Baltimore for a meeting in probably 10 years, 8 years maybe. And then back out to Pittsburgh, where I haven't also been for more than 8 or 10 years. So we're going to be out on the road a lot this year with regional meetings. It's going to be important to stay together as a community. Lots going on. So please come on out and see us in person. Next slide. The next coming events, we're going, oh my goodness, people, we're going to Capitol Hill. Okay, we did it last year. We had our first Hill Day. And after a lot of thought and reflection, we're going. And we're going to be focused on a very specific issue. It's the generic drug quality issue. And we are leaning on data that was presented from the Department of Defense, that the quality of the generic drugs, which we've talked about here and on the podcast in the past, is not what it should be. And there are actual very dangerous generic drugs out there, and we don't have any mechanism in which to find them. So the DoD did this study, and it shows how they can do it in a cost-effective way to screen the drugs. And we're going to be asking our elected representatives to do something to ensure that the quality of the drugs we are taking or we are prescribing to patients are really safe and adequate. So if you are interested in coming to Washington with us, you got to let us know no later than tomorrow. The deadline's already passed, but if you're on the webinar and you really want to go, call us and we'll see what we can do to get you in. Now more than ever, it's important for your voices to be heard and us to engage with our legislative representatives to ensure access to healthcare for all and that we have safe drugs. Next slide, please. Okay, I like this slide. This is a new one. October 18th, Morristown, New Jersey. The annual meeting is back in Jersey, followed by a gala that night. Unmask the Great Masquerader Part 3, I think we're on. And then because we're super ambitious and want to get everything done in a weekend when everybody's coming to town anyway, we're going to have our first 5K in Morristown. So plan on coming for a beautiful fall weekend in New Jersey. We're going to get you outside. We're going to get you partying. We're going to educate you. We're going to inspire you. Come on out to Jersey. Next slide, please. Yay, my thank you slide. Thanks to all of our sponsors, Edgewise, VizAI, Rocket, Tenaya, BMS, Cytokinetics, and Embria just came in today. Thanks to our board, our staff, our contractors, our volunteers, our partners, including all of our HCMA recognized Center of Excellence programs. And of course, thank you to Brandy, my donor, without whom I wouldn't have just had a 5-day whirlwind trip to Stockholm to try to help expand HCM care internationally, which I'm proud to say the HCM Society in Sweden is doing well, getting organized, and we're looking to put together a state or a countrywide meeting in April of 2026 in Stockholm. So maybe some of you want to join us in Stockholm next year. Who knows? All right, Stace, that's the end of my slides, and I don't have the agenda, so I'm not sure who I'm handing it off to right now.
It's me.
Hello, Caitlin.
It's
you.
We're going to
gonna-
clinical trials with Caitlin.
Yeah, Master GJ over here is going to get the slides back up, and hopefully this works well.
That works. So yeah, we had a busy couple of weeks there, huh? Okay, there you go.
Okay, perfect. So I recognize we are a little behind on time, so I'll see what we can do to make this a little bit easier for everybody. I know it's a late night for people with families and things. My name is Caitlin Ryan. I'm one of the associate professors at Bonheur and University of Tennessee in Memphis, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about clinical trials in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The first thing I'm going to go over is what, clinical trials are for those of you that may not be as familiar, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the recent data that's come out from the clinical trials, especially regarding our myosin inhibitors. And then I'm going to give you some information about currently available clinical trials that may be of interest or you may be qualified to enroll yourself in. So clinical trials essentially fall into two types of categories: observational clinical trials and more investigative clinical trials. The observational ones are the registry type data and things that track disease progress over time. But what I'm going to be focusing on is more of the investigative clinical trials. And so those types of trials, if they're well designed, can provide clinicians with safety and efficacy data that's really bar none. So it's the best way to get information about what's going to work for certain disease processes. The most informative of those, as you can see, are the randomized double-blinded controlled trials. And when you have new medicines like our myosin inhibitors, which came out within the last 5 years, they go through a process of several phases to make sure that they're safe and effective for use in the general population before they're approved by the Food and Drug Administration. So phase 1 trials are small, 20, less than 100 patients, so that the medication or treatment is safe and it monitors side effects. When we get into phase 2 trials, we're talking about hundreds of patients looking again at safety and efficacy, as well as how the medicine is absorbed and processed in the body. When you get to phase 3 trials, these are much more expanded trials, so thousands of patients to help confirm effectiveness, and then comparing those new therapies to either the standard or comparing that new drug, like I said, as an additional or augmented therapy to the standard regimen. And then phase 4 trials are once medications have been FDA approved, how they're in the long term working for patients. And this website I have listed here, clinicaltrials.gov, really provides anybody with information about what clinical trials are, data that's come out of clinical trials, as well as clinical trials that are currently enrolling. And you can go through that website looking at certain locations, so the United States or Europe or Asia, or you can look for disease processes and help narrow down what you might be interested in. So these are the recent clinical trials that have come out of Bristol Myers Squibb, who produce mavacamten or Camzyos, and then Cytokinetics, who produce aficamten. So these first ones listed here, Pioneer and the Pioneer open label extension, that OLE, were the phase 2. Pioneer was the phase 2 trial for mavacamten to look at the safety and efficacy in adult patients with symptomatic hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. As you move through their trials, the Explorer HCM trial was their phase 3 trial, a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial, meaning that people were put into two groups, potentially not knowing which they were getting, either a placebo or the actual medication, to look and see, comparing the two groups, if there was an improvement. And the Explorer trial showed that there was a significant improvement in functional status of these patients, meaning their symptoms got better, their NYHA class improved, and their outflow tract gradients also improved in the mavacamten group versus the placebo group. The Valor HCM trial, looking at mavacamten, again, this is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial as well, but this specifically looked at patients who were potentially eligible for septal reduction therapy, and they found at the end of the study that the patients in both the mavacamten as well as the patients who started with placebo and then crossed over to mavacamten had such an improvement that they were no longer eligible for septal reduction therapy. So another indicator this is a very effective drug that works in the adult population of patients who have obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And then more recently, the Maverick trial, the Maverick HCM trial, actually showed that there is a significant improvement in the biomarkers of cardiac wall stress and some of the circulating cardiac biomarkers in adult patients with non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So even without left ventricular outflow tract obstruction, those patients are showing early signs in the trials that they're also having benefit from use of myosin inhibitors. And then the following two, the Redwood HCM trial and the Sequoia HCM trial from Cytokinetics looking at aficamten. So their phase 2 trial was the Redwood trial, and again, a significant reduction in left ventricular outflow tract gradients and improvement in symptoms. And with Sequoia, more of a longer term study or a larger group study, and again, looking at multiple endpoints, 10 different secondary endpoints, all of which had improvement in the aficamten group over the placebo group. So some of the trials that are continuing, so from Bristol Myers Squibb, they are continuing their longer, the MAVA LTE is kind of a long-term extension of the previous trials they did. So the Maverick and Explorer, so patients that were enrolled in those are continuing to be monitored on their myosin inhibitor therapy. They're not actively enrolling patients, but the studies aren't completed yet. So we don't have all that information out yet. And similarly, their Odyssey trial is another randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial that's looking again at symptomatic non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients as well. So additional information similar. This is more of their phase 3 trial after they completed their Maverick trial. BMS also has a new myosin inhibitor that's in sort of the early phases, so in the open label pilot study type phases. Again, kind of active, but not currently recruiting patients. So we may be hearing more of that as the months and year and times occur. And then looking at the aficamten trials out of Cytokinetics, again, the Acacia, somebody at Cytokinetics is very clever and came up with lots of tree-themed names. Their Acacia trial is again actively, that one is actively recruiting patients and is looking at it's a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, again, looking for the symptomatic non-obstructive adult patients with HCM. And then they have a no longer recruiting trial, their Maple HCM trial, which is comparing aficamten to metoprolol in symptomatic patients, and we don't have that data yet out either. What our group is most excited about, since we're a pediatric center, is the pediatric trials. It's very rare to be able to get quality trials in pediatric patients, and both Bristol Myers Squibb and Cytokinetics have trials available for pediatric patients aged 12 to 18 with symptomatic obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy to see if the pediatric population is going to have the same benefits essentially and same safety and efficacy of these therapies that the adult population has. And so our institution is a center enrolling in currently is able to enroll patients in the Scout HCM trial from BMS, and then we are hoping to be active soon to also enroll patients in that Cedar HCM trial once we have a few of our additional IRB and other kind of boxes ticked off. But we're very excited to be able to offer this to patients, and hopefully we can get some good data out of this information as well. And then the last couple of things I want to talk to everybody about, again, this is information that you can get off that clinicaltrials.org website, but there's other medicines that are being investigated to see if they are going to be beneficial in the HCM population. So SGLT1 and SGLT2, a dual SGLT1 and SGLT2 inhibitor called sotagliflozin is being evaluated in 2 different trials, the Sonata HCM trial and the SOTA-CROSS HCM trial, as you can see there. Again, looking at starting to look some of these a little bit more at the non-obstructive patient population, which again is an important population of patients that have sometimes high risk factors that may be underappreciated. They also have Edgewise, which you saw as a sponsor for HCMA, has a selective cardiac sarcomere modulator that's being investigated. It's in an open label stage. So they're currently calling it their EDG 7500, and we're looking at safety and tolerability of this therapy in either a single dose or in multiple doses in patients with obstructive or non-obstructive HCM to see which is going to be more effective or if they're both as equally safe and tolerated. And then there's been previous webinars that have discussed gene therapy, so I'm not getting into that, but the TN-201 is a gene therapy that is under investigation in the MyPeak-1 trial to looking for patients with MYBPC3 positive genotypes that are symptomatic with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and that's coming out of Tenaya Therapeutics, who you also saw is a sponsor for HCMA. And I think that's all I was trying to cover tonight. I know it's a lot of words, but I'm going to let Dr. Akita, my colleague, talk about advanced heart failure therapies and heart transplants in the HCM patients.
Okay, thank you so much, and nice to meet you all. My name is Nobuyuki Keita. People call me Boo, so please call me Boo, like Halloween. So my topic is advanced heart failure and heart transplantation and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So I will talk about what happens when the disease progresses. So before I talk about heart failure and heart transplantation, I would like to review briefly about heart function. As you may remember from biology class from high school, our heart plays a crucial role in our life by being a pump. When we breathe in oxygen, it travels from our lungs to our heart into the left atrium, left ventricle, and it is ejected to our body by way of aorta. Oxygen is being used at every organ of our body and is converted into carbon dioxide and comes back to the right atrium by way of superior and inferior vena cava. The blood is then ejected to the lungs so that the carbon dioxide can be exhaled and more oxygen to be taken into the lungs by inhalation. Because of this, our organs can work properly, where gut and liver can move properly, therefore we can eat, gain nutrition, grow. Kidneys can do their jobs by creating urine to get rid of the metabolized substances. Brain receives oxygen so that we can think and process properly, study. Muscle can receive oxygen so that we can do exercise, and skin will be receiving those oxygen so that it remains warm and nicely perfused. Next slide, please.
I'm working on it, I promise. Now my screen is being silly.
Okay. When we talk about heart failure, of course, the echo and other image findings are important, but the most important thing is whether the patient is symptomatic or not. With hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart, the left ventricular wall is thick and some people may have obstruction in the pathway from left ventricle to the aorta, or people may call it outflow tract of the left ventricle. Due to this, the left ventricle is subjected to geometric changes of the heart and the high pressure in the left ventricle to overcome the obstruction to pump out the blood. And it starts to have some molecular changes in the heart muscle cells. The heart has two phases, systole, or in other words, squeeze phase, and diastole, or the relaxation phase. When the heart muscle cells continue to have the molecular changes, it may start to lose its normal function. When the systolic or the squeeze function is down, we call it systolic dysfunction, or sometimes we may call this as a burnout hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, specifically for HCM patients. When the relaxation phase of the diastolic or the diastolic phase of the heart cycle is impaired, we call this as a diastolic dysfunction or restrictive physiology hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. There is another type of cardiomyopathy like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy called restrictive cardiomyopathy, which is the cardiomyopathy that has impaired relaxation of the heart muscle due to the heart muscle cell changes. Therefore, we call it restrictive physiology. When systolic function starts to go down, we generally use these medications on the right upper hand corner to help the squeeze of the function. Dr. Apsey mentioned in his talk maybe half an hour ago, some of them were in his talk. Beta blocker may have been used already for the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients to slow down the heart rate. As Dr. Apsey mentioned, a lot of these medications can affect the blood pressure. So for example, ACE inhibitor and angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor, or ARNI, and some beta blockers have these hypotensive side effects, and which can cause the gradient across the left ventricular outflow tract worse. So it might cause more harm to these patient population. So we need to be cautious when we prescribe these medications. When diastolic function is down, we may use diuretics or beta blocker to relieve symptoms, but usually we do not have very good options for treatment. When the heart dysfunction or the heart failure continues to progress and cannot sustain our daily activities, such as the symptoms that I listed here on the right lower corner of the slide. So, we might not be able to, people might not be able to eat because they're always feeling nauseous and vomiting. They might feel short of breath all the time. Especially for pediatric population, they might have growth restriction. You might start to see swelling. You might not be able to do exercise as much as you used to be able to, including, walking up the stairs, one flight of stairs. So when these symptoms progress, although like you try to manage with the medical stuff, we call them as advanced heart failure. Next slide, please. When we start seeing hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients with systolic dysfunction or burnout, we will start the oral medical management to see whether we can help with the function or not. But we will start talking about heart transplant as an option for the treatment. When hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients start to develop restrictive feature, as I mentioned in the last slide, there aren't very many options or of treatment for that. Therefore, we will start talking about the transplant option likely sooner than the systolic dysfunction. Another indication for heart transplant with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is intractable arrhythmia. Heart transplantation is a big process with limited resources. Therefore, they need to go through a thorough evaluation. Patients need to be seen by other specialists, getting all sorts of labs, patients and family to get psychosocial assessment, which Dr. Logan will probably talk a little bit about it. So it takes some time. We also don't want to wait too long, since if the patient is too sick, then they may not be a good candidate for heart transplant. Even when a patient is listed on the organ wait list, patients need to wait until an organ to become available. Because of all of these, we try to initiate the process of it at the right time and rather sooner than later. Lastly, I will talk briefly about the fact about heart transplant in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy population. In the United States, about 500 pediatric patients receive heart transplantation a year. But the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients only account for 5 to 6% of the cases. Some patients may deteriorate further while waiting for heart transplant and cannot be managed only on medications and may require mechanical circulatory support, or which is called a ventricular assist device, or a VAD, like in this picture that I put. A pump is directly sewn usually into the left ventricle, and the cannula that is connected to the pump is sewn usually directly to the aorta to suck the blood out from the left ventricle and gets ejected out of the cannula. This is called LVAD as it supports left ventricle, but in general, LVAD is suitable for patients who have decreased systolic or squeeze function with large ventricular cavity. Compared to another common cardiomyopathy called dilated cardiomyopathy, where a left ventricle gets dilated with thinning of the left ventricular wall with decreased systolic function, the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy carries some surgical challenges where the left ventricular wall is thick and the left ventricular cavity is small. One study showed that while about a quarter of dilated cardiomyopathy patients who are supported on VAD to transplant, but only 3% of all hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients transplanted were on VAD. So in summary, when the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy progresses, some people may have geometric changes, which can cause systolic or the squeeze function to go down, or restrictive physiology to show up, which is the diastolic dysfunction. We try to manage medically, but some people may progress further to require heart transplantation. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Patricia Logan. I'm the psychologist with the heart failure team. So I'm going to talk about ways in which we can improve psychosocial responding or psychological responding in HCM patients. So while my colleagues have talked about the advances that have been made on the medical side, and there are many for HCM patients, we still have lots of gaps or lots of room for improvement when it comes to the psychological and psychosocial functioning of our children and adolescents and their families. And so what we know is that the actual diagnosis of HCM can within itself bring with it a lot of distress for children and adolescents, which can increase exponentially after certain cardiac arrest. Also, we know that our families have lots of impairments or lots of impact from the diagnoses of HCM from their children as well and other offsprings, as well as in first degree relatives. So we have to be cognizant of the impact from a psychological perspective or psychosocial perspective. And what we know also is that there are many ways that we can improve the psychosocial functioning and implement various strategies in order to reduce or mitigate some of the impact of HCM diagnoses and improve the quality of health and long-term outcomes. Next slide, please. So children and adolescents are more vulnerable to psychological stress due to a lack of understanding and limited coping mechanisms, which predispose them to mood disorders, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress, as well as to substance misuse. Their quality of life can be impacted significantly, which can result from the actual diagnosis itself, as well as the possibility of sudden cardiac arrest. Which increases the post-traumatic stress levels and also can serve to increase depression and anxiety, which in turn can impact the overall health outcomes for individuals who have been diagnosed with HCM. What we know from the literature, and most of the literature is from non-US studies, because we have not done a good job in the US of really looking at mental health impact of HCM. But what we know is that the post-traumatic stress symptoms can persist in survivors well beyond the acute event itself. And therefore, we need to make sure that we're providing support both during the acute event and for a significant period of time after the acute event. Survivors can feel lost as if they're moving through life without a roadmap. They oftentimes will feel that they lack information outlining expectations for recovery. They don't have significant information or good information on how to manage the challenges and how to understand and deal with non-cardiac symptoms. So there are many areas that we need to intervene in to support individuals who've actually had a sudden cardiac arrest and those who are family members of the individuals who have had a sudden cardiac arrest. We know that the impact of psychological distress can also hinder adherence to treatment, medical treatment, and advice. It can also increase mortality and also lead to poor self-care, all of which can be detrimental when it comes to managing a patient with HCM. Next slide, please. Further, we know that the family is impacted, as indicated before. Families of individuals with HCM can have increased demands on the primary caregiver, which in and of itself can create a significant level of stress and erode the mental health functioning, and which can also make it cascade through the family, particularly as it relates to parenting. The overall impact of HCM can be felt in a myriad of ways, including the burden of care that is associated with caring for the individual with a chronic illness. And families have to manage not only the illness itself or the individual who may be impacted, but also manage how they will discuss the potential impact of HCM and genetic heredity with other family members. Parents of children who survive a sudden cardiac arrest endure a higher level of stress and worry. The fear of what is the fear of the what if is exacerbated by the sudden cardiac event itself. They also may carry a sense of guilt, particularly if they've been determined to be the carrier of the genetic condition. Other family members who themselves may be genetic carriers are also at increased risk of psychological distress after sudden cardiac arrest, and that they themselves begin to worry about the what ifs and the possibilities of what could happen to them. Parents of children who've survived a parents of children who have survived a sudden cardiac arrest may um, constantly monitor their child. They constantly monitor the medications. They also have to make appointments and manage appointments, and then they lack control, all of which can lead to increased psychological distress. Next slide, please. So in looking through the literature, there are several factors that can impact the outcomes for families across the lifespan. The familiar nature of the family history, parental influence, age, diagnosed condition itself, and we're talking about hereditary heart conditions, management strategy, and the support and understanding. In children and adolescents, particularly in adolescence, the factors that are most influential is the family history. Has there been a sudden cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death? Parental influence, how the parents manage the actual diagnoses itself and manage the potential of a life-threatening issue influences how the adolescent responds as well as how children respond. The age of diagnosis is also important, as the older the individual is in terms of moving into the adolescent phase versus being in early childhood, they have more potential for detrimental effects. And then the support and understanding that they receive can be both a positive and a negative, in that over support, which oftentimes will happen with parents of children who have um, HCM, can lead to a regression in terms of their meeting developmental milestones as they move through adolescence, being independent, going through experimental stages of life, and which is meant to help one grow. So all of those factors can influence how the outcome of individuals who've been diagnosed with HCM. Next slide, please. In terms of psychological interventions, there are many ways in which we can address this, but treatment fostering positive perception of illness and strong sense of identity links to greater adaptation and acceptance of an HCM diagnosis and improved coping skills. Also, evaluation of psychological challenges along the diagnostic pathways will increase awareness of patients and their families and their needs and improve health outcomes. Families indicated that they would like to have information that acknowledge their distress and provide them with compassion. They also would like information in terms of how to navigate it and cope with the hopelessness and with hope, how to balance the priorities. They would like information on psychological aftercare after a certain cardiac event, and then avoiding abandonment. Lastly, they'd like information on how to deal with the subsequent guilt that may accompany certain cardiac arrest or certain cardiac death. There are two major ways in which we can address this as psychologists as well as other caregivers, psychosocial caregivers. We can look at treatment that involves, next slide, please. We can look at treatment that is universal, in that all survivors or all individuals who are impacted by a sudden cardiac event or a certain cardiac arrest, that they all receive explicit psychoeducation that includes a discussion of the emotional trauma as well as non-cardiac symptoms. That will also incorporate psychologists in the clinical care to provide emotional support during the screening process, at the diagnosis process, and also following a sudden cardiac arrest. And there's lastly the targeted risk-based individualized psychological interventions. So right now, most of our services are through many hospitals is consult-based. However, knowing that there are increased risk for these families to go through many avenues of psychological distress, we can be more proactive in providing either the universal supports at the outset for any family member who has been determined to have HCM or at risk of having HCM, and then look at targeted risk-based individualized psychological interventions, which would be therapies that are directed toward individuals who have screened high in terms of anxiety, depression, and other psychological distress symptoms. So that kind of covers where we are in terms of psychosocial and psychological interventions, and the need is very high for additional supports that we are not really looking at in terms of how to address the needs of individuals with HCM. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you, everybody, for letting me control your slides. Everyone can see the medical providers. I can follow along really, really closely and well with our my colleagues from their medical slides. And then Dr. Logan talks about things that clearly I still am having a hard time keeping up with, which is why we're so, so glad to have her as a part of our team helping support our patients. I'll put this up really briefly. This is the contact information. Bonheur Children's Hospital is located in Memphis, Tennessee. We are very proud to be a center of excellence, and I think still accurately can say we are the only isolated pediatric hospital that is a center of excellence. And so I will put that out there for all of us. And this is some information, some general information for the hospital, and then the information to contact our clinic via phone or fax number. And then if anyone in the organization, if there's families or providers that have additional questions for any of us, we would all be happy to provide our direct contact information through the HCMA and are happy to answer questions at any time. But I'll stop sharing so that anyone who has questions, we can go through all of that.
So I have some late breaking news that doesn't really hit the peds community too much, but hey, I got late breaking news at school in cardiology. Earlier today, Alnylam got approval from the FDA for a new treatment for cardiac amyloidosis. So one of our other thick hearts got a new treatment today. So yay to Alnylam for getting that over the finish line, and hopefully some of our thick-hearted friends will get some relief from their amyloidosis. We have a couple of questions here. I'm going to start with the second one because I'm going to leave the last one and I'll take it out at the end because it's a little confusing. With young children, it must be difficult to determine if your child is having symptoms related to HCM. Are kids even more severely underdiagnosed than the adults? I don't necessarily know that there's a yes and no answer here. I think this is some opinions. Who wishes to share an opinion on this?
I mean, I will say I think we probably underappreciate the severity of pediatric patients.
Yeah.
Almost across the board for all cardiac diagnoses, because kids are super, super adaptable and they will stop doing something and they find other things that they enjoy. They don't need to play soccer or baseball. Maybe they want to do a quieter activity and nobody really questions that. And so I think there's a lot of kids that not in the, specifically in the HCM world, but I can say for our congenital patients where they get a new treatment or they get a new heart and they realize how poorly they felt before. Kids just don't realize how badly they are feeling because that's their normal all the time. And so I do think we really underappreciate the severity of disease in a lot of our patients.
I come from a very unique perspective as I was a kid with HCM all those many moon ago. And I can tell you that in retrospect, there were a lot of days where I functioned through a tremendous amount of dizziness, chest pain, palpitations that distracted me almost daily. I was not the best student because half the time I was thinking I was going to die because it was, 1980 and it was scary and you'd feel your heart race. So like looking at an algebra equation just really didn't interest me. I was wondering if I was going to, have a problem or not. Thankfully, our knowledge of HCM has expanded so much, and my daughter's experience was different than mine. And the next generation will even be better, I suspect. But kiddos have a hard time figuring out what's normal and what's not. And even adults have a hard time figuring out what's normal and what's not when you've had something that slowly creeps up over years and then becomes more of a problem. Anybody else have anything they wanted to say about hiding symptoms or the undiagnosed?
No, I echo what Caitlin was saying, the kids being very adaptive in a way. The younger the kids, for the younger the age, meaning for most of our patients, I feel, the less I feel symptomatic they are. Like I have seen kids who have a severe hypertrophy with high gradients who totally asymptomatic, super active kids. As they grow and they get more to the adolescence, I would say they become more like adults and their symptoms become more like adult symptoms and they tend to report more symptoms with older age. But yeah, that the younger ones are the ones that are like sometimes very tricky and the look can be very deceiving.
And the word choice for symptom explanation is very different. There's another little girl who might be on the screen or not, who used to refer to her heart as squeezing. I feel it squeezing. To this day, I still don't know what the heck she meant by that. It's the redhead down there. But that was how she was explaining the odd feeling in her chest. And the words might not connect with the parent and maybe not even with the clinician, but they're feeling it. They're feeling it. Stacy, would you like to comment on that?
As a child, that was what I felt. Squeezing. I don't know that that's what I feel now today with my symptoms, but it was something that I couldn't articulate at that time, but I just knew that something was off and wrong, and I wasn't keeping up with my peers, and I could tell something was off, yes. But I had to express that at the time to my clinician, other than it's squeezing, or and I think it was more so palpitations, and I would do this symbol along with it, and they're like, oh.
Word choice. Next question. Have fun with this one, and we can figure out how you want to answer it. Are there guidelines around exercise for kids with HCM? Exercise in HCM, the new hot topic that we thought was resolved many years ago, but we're revisiting today. Who wants to take the lead on this? Gonna call you out, Caitlin.
I mean,
Oh,
it's fine.
well,
It's any of us can answer it. I'm happy for my
No,
colleague.
yeah.
It's I think, and everyone in our group can have an opinion, but the reality I think is most of us now, especially in pediatrics, are, kids should be able to participate unless there is some very clear, you are gonna absolutely like drop dead if you get on that field. We do whatever we can to help kids participate in a safe way as possible. And a ton of that is through really dedicated shared decision making, having very in-depth conversations about risk assessment with parents and kids. But I can tell you from personal experience, I've had patients who the lack of being able to participate was a psychological detriment to the degree of self-injurious behavior, because sports and participation and being involved in something is so important for pediatric patients to feel like they are part of their peers. And if without that, they really lose more than just their health, their physical health benefits, but it's a huge mental health issue, as Dr. Logan was alluding to also.
And
Yeah,
just
oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to add that if you actually follow the guidelines have evolved over time from being very strict and very rigid and very, I would say, inhibiting when it comes to exercising to much more lenient, I would say, the most recent guidelines, allowing the kids, actually encouraging the kids when it comes to mild to moderate exercise to participate. The question more or less about the competitive exercising or the competitive sports is more of like that debatable question, the shared decision between the physicians, the providers, the institution, the families, the patients themselves. And that's more of what most of the arguments now, or I would say debate, not argument, is about. But overall, the guidelines have been pushing and encouraging patients to participate in exercise.
Thank you. Elise, I'm dying to hear what you wanted to say.
Oh, no, don't get too excited. No, I definitely agree with both of them, and I'll give Caitlin a shout out to Project Adam, which I'm sure you've heard about, and in schools and whatnot. So that's great. And I think that's part of the counseling as well, is even if their school isn't participating in that, just to make sure there's an AED counseling about symptoms of diastolic heart failure, and also to the parents saying, if you notice your kid is not keeping up as well with the others, over a couple weeks at a time, that sort of stuff. Things to call about. And then also with the kiddo too, just saying, don't be scared to tell an adult, if you don't feel good, you gotta tell them. It doesn't mean we have to, bring you in to see you, but we want to know about it, type of thing. So that was kind of the only things that I can think to add, but I've never had an HCM patient, adult or child, that I've restricted from anything. It's always a conversation.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Are the top symptoms of HCM in adults the same as the symptoms in kids? That's an interesting question. I think so, but maybe kids.
Yeah, again, for adolescents, it's basically the same, I would say. For younger kids, it's, as I said, it's very sometimes vague and very hard to determine what the symptoms exactly are. I don't know if that answers that question, but the sudden cardiac death is another maybe important thing that we need to talk about and compare maybe adults to peds. And I think we are lucky in the pediatric ward that at least we don't see as much sudden cardiac death as we see in the adult ward. So
It's
that's
changed a lot.
correct.
When I first got into this 30 years ago, there were a lot of kids that we lost, a lot. And we've gotten so much better at identifying them and treating them. And even the sudden death of adults has gone down once you identify these people. So we're doing good, but it's not perfect. And I don't want to give anybody the misconception that we can predict everything. There's this balancing act. What do you want? What's important to you, and what's important to you as a family, as a child? It's hard. I've been the parent, I've been the child. It's a very complicated balancing act. Now, back when I was diagnosed, it was sit down, don't do anything, no sports for you. It probably impacted me in ways that I haven't fully dealt with, and maybe Patricia and I can talk about that someday. But it was there. It's part of my history. And then I went through two kids at very different ages, like they were, 10, 11 years apart. So criteria for one was different, and then the next was different. So we've evolved, and it's changed every about 10 years or so. And it's going to continue to evolve a little bit. Some patients might get more restricted, some may get more freedom, but it's very individualized. And I think that's probably the most important message. We all have to talk about this and accept the fact that there is no zero risk in anything in life, not just HCM. What age do you guys treat? 0 to
Everyone.
Yep.
So we are very at Bonheur in Memphis, we certainly are obviously a pediatric hospital, but we see patients of all ages for the most part. Certainly we are very happy to see full families, which we do. The physician assistant that we are so proud of in our clinic that works with us every day, she actually came to us from the adult world. And so our hospital has a lot of really good mix of all of that. And we see parents and then they bring their kids in, or we see a child and then we screen a parent and then we start seeing a parent. I think we have 1 or 2 grandparents that we see in our clinic. So we see them all.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I was gonna say a couple weeks ago in clinic, there was a young adult guy, married. He is genotype positive. His younger son of 2 has the genotype but no phenotype, but we still watch him. And then the wife is pregnant with a 3rd son. So we had to talk about, screening the baby when he's born and so on and so forth. And then he sadly too had, I talked to you guys about him, was kind of going towards the transplant route. So starting to talk more about that.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the multi-generational aspect of HCM is always hard to kind of absorb and watch. And our family has a new one coming in June that's at risk as well. So you're like, fingers crossed. Let that coin flip the other way for once, please. And you hope. Are there disadvantages to getting genetic testing on kids young for things like life insurance? So Gina doesn't cover life insurance. And right now, I got to tell you, I had this happen within the family. Somebody tried to get life insurance on some littles, and the littles were all rejected just based on dad's known identification of HCM. Insurance companies are getting much stricter in what they're covering, and they do have a right to deny or rate you. So if it's in the family and you can get a policy on the kids before genetic testing, before anybody's noticing, sometimes they slide through and sometimes they don't. So what do you guys think about genetic testing young?
I mean, we test a lot of patients. I'll be honest, it's probably not right that I don't think about those kinds of things, but it's usually something that is not the immediate concern for most of us when we're having those conversations. I do appreciate having our genetics team involved in these patients because they're so much more familiar with what happens if you have a positive or you have an unexpected positive. Maybe it's not an MYH7 gene, it's some amyloidosis gene that's not going to affect a child until they're 45 or something. But now they know they have it at 15. And so we test lots of littles in our clinic. We do a lot of genetic testing to try to help identify at-risk family members. But we don't do probably as good of a job as we should about the potentials for how that might impact, insurance coverage or other things later in life.
Caitlin, I think that also just kind of taps into another component of how it impacts the family and the things that families wouldn't ordinarily think about. And so that's why there's a combination approach that's recommended with not just the medical team, but also with genetic counseling and the psychologists as well to talk through some of the non-traditional kind of questions that may come up or concerns that may arise.
I completely agree with that. And Patricia, if you could hang for like 2 minutes at the conclusion of this webinar, I'd love to tell you about a project that we're working on, but I'm not ready to announce to the public yet. So that would be really great if we could just talk for a sec. Okay, the last one is a really complicated one, so I held it for last. This individual is interested in coming with us to DC and is asking the question, how do you think changes to Medicaid will impact the HCM community? So, yeah, there's that whole thing going on, right? And we've got a situation where a very large percentage of kids, specifically with HCM, are covered by Medicaid programs. We have some families that are covered by Medicaid programs because they're ill. They haven't been able to stay in the workplace for long. They come in and out of employment because their symptoms are variable. They have challenges, and that's what safety nets are there for. So I think we really need the safety nets, and I'm happy that my tax dollars go to support such initiatives because that's how I believe society should work. I could probably go down a few rabbit holes that might get me in a little bit of trouble, but kind of think we need insurance. We need Medicaid. We need Medicare. We need to bring down the cost of health insurance. We need to get rid of all the stupid loopholes, pre-authorization, step therapy, paying for poor quality generic drugs. We've got to fight for what we should be doing for people, and that's getting them access to care and working as a true community. Anybody else want to come into the water with me?
I mean, like you said, I would probably venture to say the vast majority of patients that we see, as certainly in our region of the United States, are Medicaid patients. They are all very high risk with their medical diagnosis, as well as other family stressors and things which make access to care, whether it be getting to our appointments or getting to medications, very challenging. And if that changes and becomes even more challenging for them, we will see, I think, unfortunately more death and more serious injury for the pediatric patients because parents won't be able to take a day off work to come to the doctor's appointment. That takes, our clinic echo and EKG, the visit, it takes a long time to see a patient in our clinic. And so we want to be thorough, but that means that families miss a day of work, and lots of people can't afford to miss a day of work a couple times a year. And if it gets even harder, then I think we're going to see that we don't see those patients as often, and we're going to see more negative outcomes from that.
I think we've worked really hard to get to where we are today, to have good treatments available, the ability to, do the surveillance, to identify these kids in advance. I'm even really excited about the role of AI in healthcare in this space, because things like the Viz AI read, like we can find people in larger quantities. Maybe we can even do more EKGs to find more of these kids, but to what end? To tell them they have a disease that we can't treat them for because there's no money for kids with genetic heart disease? Our government's going to make that decision? I'm perplexed. And I'm perplexed. It's a very bizarre time, and there's a lot of fear. And we're seeing it in the community starting to bubble up. Am I going to be able to get my Medicare? Am I going to be able to get my drugs? Am I going to be able to take my kids for their annual exam or Medicaid? And above my pay grade, can't fix it, but we are going to use our voice as an advocacy organization to facilitate the conversation. I can have conversations with people that I don't agree with. And that's what we're going to all need to do. We're going to have conversations, and we're going to try to make positive change, but we need all of our voices to come to the table. Nobody's going to do this alone, and we can't be silent. We have to have conversations. And some people may resort to things like name calling or saying really bizarre things and acting as if they're scientifically factual. We bring the receipts. We bring the reports. We bring the papers. We bring the data. We bring the truth. We bring the science. That's what our team does. And it's going to be tiring. And I'm going to probably call you guys and say, hey, State House, gotta have you there. This is what's going on. Your voices are going to matter as physicians treating these patients. We need to keep everybody in this conversation. So as we venture into some very unusual times, I will tell you what I did a week ago Sunday. Little American history for you. I live in Morris County, New Jersey. We were in the middle of the Revolutionary War. Like, it all happened here. The cannonballs that were fired were made with iron ore that came from my town. That's how deep we are into Revolutionary War history here. And I grew up in it, and I didn't like it then, but I certainly like it now. On 4th of July, I do a weird thing. I visit patriots' graves. I know that sounds a little bit bizarre, but that's what I do. But I went for a hike at Jockey Hollow. Anybody know what Jockey Hollow is? Anybody know the story of Tempe Wick? Okay, I'm a geek. It's a great story. Look up Tempe Wick. She hid her horse underneath her bed so that they wouldn't take her horse away. Great story. And it's true. It's a true story. But where the troops stayed the winter after crossing the Delaware in 1777. Thank you. My husband's giving me the factual. Like, I always get that one wrong. That's where they stayed, and that's the encampment. And then they came back again a couple of years later and did another encampment there. But those guys walked with no shoes on from where I live all the way down to Trenton. They went through some really hard times on the concept that they could live free and that they could give that to the future generations. So I kind of believe in the Constitution. And let's make sure that we all are fighting for our Constitution to stay as it is, and that people get access to health care, because it's really, really important that we build a system that is sustainable. So let's all do that together. Any final thoughts from the Bonheur team tonight?
I think we all
No.
I think we all want to just be thankful for the opportunity, Lisa, and the
Yeah.
rest of the HCMA for allowing us to present today. And I appreciate everyone's time. I know we were a large group and we took way longer than we were supposed to. And I appreciate everyone staying involved because we're all very passionate about what we do. And we're so happy to be able to share it with all of you.
Absolutely. Send my best back to Jeff. I'm sorry I couldn't join
Will
us
do.
tonight.
No.
And thank you guys for joining. And Patricia, if you want to hang out for a second, I'd love to tell you what I'm working on because I think you're going to like it. All right, everybody. Thanks for staying with
Take
us.
care.
And you guys,